Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be starting shortly. We'll just give it a few minutes for people to join. Start in a minute or two. So we still have people joining. I'm just watching to see when that slows down, and then we'll get started. Okay, it seems to slow down, so we'll begin. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. I'm Catherine Sanford with Liberty Mutual, and also co-chair of the Career Strategies and Development Committee, along with Erin Miller of Smith Group. And on behalf of Cornet New England and our committee, I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's CRAVE event, Customer Service Masterclass. We're going to begin with a few announcements. Great. So we've got several upcoming CRAVE or Cornet Real Estate, or Cornet Real Advantage rather, virtual education CRAVE webinars shown here. I'd like to review those. So on October 16th, we've got one which will speak to location analytics. October 22nd, the next one, we're on talent. And November 6th, space as a service. So just a reminder to please check our website and your Monday morning chapter newsletter to register for those. And a reminder to engage with us on social media and help share the Cornet New England story through Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And next, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for their generous support of the chapter. Without their support, we would not be able to provide our members with valuable content, such as today's presentation. Thank you to our platinum sponsors and to our gold and silver sponsors. Thank you. So before we dive into today's presentation, I wanted to note that questions can be submitted to our panel through the Q&A box on Zoom. Not the chat box, but the Q&A box, and we will read through questions at the end of the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jonathan Marin from SMMA.
Catherine, happy Friday, everybody. So I'd like to start with a quote, if we can just advance a slide, and then we'll introduce our speakers. So this is a great quote we found, which a lot of what today's presentation is based on is really summarized here. So from the wonderful poet Maya Angelou, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And this presentation or this discussion, I would say, came from kind of that idea, which is that career growth and really customer service are really inexplicably tied to one another. And one of the things, just for housekeeping, that I wanted to kind of go over real quick is there are going to be some terms here that probably get used interchangeably that may not necessarily be completely interchangeable, but the idea of customer, client, is going to kind of be an interchangeable term today, because we're talking about, many people have internal customers and clients, many people have external, many people have both. So that's one thing to think about. And then the other thing is, the idea of service, experience, those types of things are also kind of interchangeable in today's discussion. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to put together a program where we went out to some folks who are in industries that are far more readily identifiable as, we'll call them, service and experience industries, and get their perspective on how they provide best-in-class service in their particular industries, as a way to reflect on the Cree industry and on what many of us have to do on a day-to-day basis, and how we make both those internal and external shareholders feel great about the work we're doing with them and what we're providing. So what we did was we identified 3 industries, and we have a panelist from each. So we have the sales industry, which is obviously an incredible service-driven industry. We have kind of the customer service industry, and then the hospitality industry. So with that, I'm going to ask our 3 panelists to turn on their audio and video, and we'll do a really quick introduction for each of them. So we're going to start with Mitch Evans, who I think many are familiar with. But Mitch, if you wouldn't mind giving a quick introduction of yourself.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thanks for letting me be a part of this. I'm Mitch Evans. I, for the past 33 years, have been with Creative Office Pavilion, exclusively in a sales and sales leadership position. We started as young kids back in the mid 80s, and really have, with nothing, just a small group of people to start the company up. And from that point, we grew the company to, I think, exceptional customer service, to be Herman Miller's largest dealership nationwide for 17 out of the last 18, 19 years. So I'm pleased to be here and share what info I may have as it relates to getting a customer and keeping a customer happy.
Awesome. Thanks, Mitch. Let's move to Brian Hanley. Brian?
Thank you, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Brian Hanley. I'm a vice president with BlackRock in the retail service center based out of Boston. BlackRock is, for those who may not be familiar, we're the largest asset manager in the financial world. And for the retail service center, we've been an award-winning service center within the industry for the past 20 years. So again, just happy to be here and just share any insight that I might be able to just to help you going forward.
Great, thanks, Brian. And last, I'm going to turn over to Seth, and just to avoid any confusion, we are related, so we'll cover that one right off the bat. But Seth, if you would introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here today. I bring the experience from the hospitality industry for my entire adult life here, both on the traditional restaurant side, providing world-class customer service and hospitality, and then over the last 5 years, transitioned that into the non-traditional restaurant side, which includes airports. We operate 25 units across 8 airports, and have really focused on elevating the level of service that you would receive when dining in an airport. So excited to be here and take your questions.
Great. So quick format just for everybody. So this is going to run as a panel discussion with a number of questions to the panelists. If you have questions, we're going to queue those for the end. So feel free to enter them through the Q&A section. And then when we get to the end of kind of the the questions that I have for the panelists, we'll touch on the questions that you folks out in the audience have. So let's get started. So the first question I'm going to pose out to our panelists is really what we want to do is frame some context to where we are now as it pertains to service. So can you talk a little bit about how client experience, client service, customer service has changed over the course of your career? And I'm going to start with Mitch first on that, but we'll hit all of our panelists on this one.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. It has changed incredibly, and mostly due to the rapid rise of technology. When I started back in the early to mid 80s, you'd come back from being out on the road all day, and you'd come back and you'd have a table full of pink slips, phone messages that your receptionist took for you from your clients. And, if you could get to it in a day or two, that was a great thing, but there was no real urgency to the speed that was required to respond to what your clients were. You could hide. All of a sudden, come the mid 90s, email gets in play and everything changes. And today, I think the biggest thing that people are looking for that's changed is just the speed at which responses are required. As one of my sales guys said to me recently, I wear sneakers, not boots. And I think that's probably the same in most industries.
So I think that's an interesting point you bring up, Mitch, about speed. I would ask you, do you think that also has to do with kind of timing? I think one of the things that, that I see is that, there's different expectations for when people are available, when they're not available, during the course of the week. Is that something else you've seen change a lot?
Yeah. People, it really depends on each individual client, but if as a general thought from a customer service standpoint, if you look at each one as understanding that they need you to respond with your information before they can do their job. And that, again, my ultimate goal is to please the client. And the client could be you, Jonathan, from an architectural standpoint. It could be Brian as a client, Seth as a client. It could be a contractor. It really runs the gambit. But the ability for me to get them the information they need to do their job to please their client is really what hopefully keeps them coming back to me.
I think that's an interesting point, and I'm going to use it as a way to transition to Seth for a second, because I think talking about a lot of different clients and how to kind of please all of them. I know in Seth's business, in addition to the people who are eating in the restaurants, you've got airport administrators, you've got, folks who work in the airport. So can you talk a little bit about how some of that has changed relative to over time and relative to how you guys look at your customer base now in airports?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it starts with technology and it really ends there, really. There is such a need right now for immediate response. Whereas 5, 10, 15 years ago, you had 24, 48, 72 hours to respond to people. And you brought up airport administrators, and I'll give you a great example of that. If there is a customer service issue within our environment, and it gets to the unfortunate point where it gets to that airport level, a half hour goes by and you haven't responded, the phone rings. You don't pick up, there's a text message, there's an email. So there's this thought process out there now that we're always available. Right. In our world, we really have so many multiple sets of customers that we work with that you also can use that technology to your advantage. And be able to drive down and pinpoint where that problem might have occurred down to the second it happened. But that correspondence, there is no lead time now to gather facts. And technology's driven that, and I think that's where we struggle right now, with the fact being that you have no time to get the information and respond, because everybody expects you to have your phone, your iPhone, your Android with you all the time, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. How come you didn't respond at 7 p.m. on a Saturday night?
So I think that's a great segue. I wanted to get to Brian for a second here, because I think from those of us who deal with folks in customer service, you're always reaching out to customer service to help and always trying to figure out if they do help, and sometimes feel like they don't help. And so Brian, I wanted to kind of get you to add on to that a little bit about, how people's expectations have changed about what customer service is going to provide, and how difficult that is to kind of teach to do that.
Sure. A lot of the same themes, both that Mitch and Seth had just mentioned. One, giving the advances in technology. I remember I've been in financial services now for the past 28 years. And I remember at the beginning of my career where I worked in a call center as a phone center rep, all you had was, all your clients had was just the telephone as a means of reaching you. There was no online access, there was no smartphones, anything like that. So now managing an investor service group, we've seen just so many different changes that give folks the ability to access their account information from anywhere 24/7, just being able to pull up their account, pull out their phone, open up the app, touch it, in 2 or 3, finger swipes, all of a sudden they're looking at their investments. So if there's something that they don't understand, they're going to reach out to us. Our client base is not only shareholders of our mutual funds, but also the financial advisors that sell those funds on our behalf. So there's going to be 2 different knowledge bases there. The shareholder may have opened the fund through a financial advisor, but they may not understand how funds work. So there's a lot of educating on our part, just explaining a lot of basic investment concepts that the shareholder might not be aware of. But not only that, pointing them to where the resources are online, walking through them, different things on their accounts, how they can get product information. With financial advisors, though, these are things that they're already aware of, plus we're probably not the only firm that they deal with. So the expectation is going to be much more urgent, where they're going to want an answer, they're going to want it now. They're not going to want as detailed an answer as you're going to give a shareholder. They're just going to want a quick and easy answer so that they can then take it to their clients. So 2 different knowledge sets, 2 different level sets of expectations, and different comfort levels as far as using the technology that's available to them. So it forces us to be able to multitask depending on who the client is that we're interacting with, whether it's a financial advisor or if it's a direct shareholder.
So I think that's a really interesting idea, and I want to build off that and stick with it, Brian, for a second.
Sure.
So this idea of, I've gotten into the habit in my quote unquote old age of telling people that, the worst thing that ever happened to the construction and design industry is like HGTV, because now everybody thinks they know exactly how to build a building all the time. And so you come across people in all walks of life now who want to tell you exactly what the right way to do a roof is, or this or that or whatever. And so you brought up kind of this idea of, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, that, the people you're trying to serve are more educated than they've ever been, which I think is kind of a double-edged sword. So could you talk a little bit about how you, as a service provider and as someone who trains people providing service, how do you address that? How do you help people know how to best understand what it is that the person talking to them is really asking for, and how do you get into that?
Sure. What we do is with our employees, we teach them we have a proactive service model. So not necessarily anticipating what a caller's need is, but being able to listen between the lines, if you would, because a lot of times, especially if you're dealing with a shareholder who may not necessarily understand how their particular account works, what type of product that they're invested in, really actively listen to what it is that they're explaining, because they may be trying to explain one thing, but they could be talking about something completely different. So using those active listening skills, asking probing questions, asking clarifying questions, really trying to drill down to whatever the root cause is, because it's not always going to be readily clear. Sometimes a caller may be able to call up, especially a financial advisor, tell you right what the situation is, and they'll know how to explain it properly. An individual shareholder may not know that, so that then it becomes our job to really help determine what exactly the issue is, and then not just answering the question for them and sending them on their way, by being proactive, offering solutions that will help better fit into their own individual situation to, one, just make for a better overall client experience downstream, plus prevent whatever that issue was from recurring again.
I think that's interesting, and I think that probably resonates with Mitch a lot. So I'm gonna come to Mitch next. I know that as I have a sales background. A long time ago, I one of my first jobs was selling TVs, which to this day I have told people that selling TVs is probably the best prep for my job today. Way more valuable than architecture school. I shouldn't say that out loud, but in some ways it's true. So Mitch, based on what Brian was just talking about with active listening and with really kind of being engaged with the customer, I would imagine that would resonate with you pretty well in terms of the sales perspective on how best to engage people in that sense.
Yeah, it sure does. And Brian's right on. The big thing that salespeople, especially young salespeople, need to learn is it's about asking questions. That's the most important thing that a salesperson can do. I mean, I talk to my guys all the time about, when they go to a party on a Friday night or a Saturday night, they should be talking 3 times as much as the person is talking to them. And it's not just talking about themselves, it's trying to find out what makes that person tick. So when they sit down in front of a customer or a friend or something, they could, they're at a cocktail party, you can learn a lot of stuff by asking questions, good probing questions. And you find that your most successful folks do that inherently, intrinsically. We also we're very big on, you bring up a good point where you've got people who understand your business in some cases better than you do. Whether it be just the advent of where people can go on the internet and research products and so forth. So, or you get a senior designer or a senior contractor who's calling in looking for information, and I've got a junior salesperson on it. So we do a lot of mentoring with the company so that younger people work for several years with senior people, sort of helping them in the trenches to learn the business. Because it's not like you come out of college wanting to sell credenzas. It's just, it's not the first thing that someone had to tell me what a credenza was when I came out. So the mentorship program and sort of learning, under somebody, I think it was a very critical part of developing salespeople who are customer centric.
How do you look for those traits in the people that you're hiring and the people that you're deciding to make investments into? What are the kinds of traits that you look for there?
Well, what's interesting is you mentioned selling TVs. For me, when I would interview and looking to find a good prospect, I wanted somebody that waited tables, or that was in the customer service business, doing something where they had to deal with the public. Because if they can handle 6 tables at one time with people screaming at them, they typically can handle the pressures that come with what we do. They also can juggle a lot of stuff at the same time, which again, if you're going to be successful in any of this stuff that we're doing, you've got to be able to juggle multiple things at the same time. So between that and my favorite thing was this huggability factor. When I met with people, I'd prefer to rather give them a hug than just shake their hands. And if you find somebody that's that way, you typically find somebody that's got the basic roots of being a good salesperson.
So I think you brought up a great point, and I'm going to bounce to Seth now because I want to add to that. And as someone who's eaten in a number of Seth's restaurants over the years, I can tell you when it comes to finding people who are good at customer service, he's pretty good. So can you talk a little bit about on your side of it, and then I have a follow up to this too, but can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on how we find people who really have that mentality, and how in the hospitality industry where that is critical, how you do that?
So it's critical because, what a lot of people don't realize is food can be terrible, but if the service is great, there's a 70% chance they're going to come back. If it's vice versa, you're 25-30% chance. So, my philosophy and my teams, and some days they want to strangle me for it, is it's a simple saying. Hire the personality, teach the skill. So if somebody comes in to us, and I love when manager told me, oh, we hired the greatest server today, 30 years of serving experience, all this stuff. I said, he'll be gone in 2 months. And they look at me and say, no, he won't. 2 months later, they tell me I'm right. But the purpose of that is to talk about that personality is really what drives our business. You know, the quote that you mentioned earlier, and it just happens to be this way, is a quote I've had on my email signature for 10, 12 years now, because it's a feeling. So when you interview somebody, they got to be able to look you in the eyes. You know, they got to be able to, you know, to Mitch's point, shake your hand, and they got to feel the importance of what they're about to get into, and they got to have a personality. You know, we can teach the skill. We can't teach somebody that's got energy, that wants to come to work every day and make other people's days better. And that's what we do. And that's where the industry has changed over time. And this younger generation of servers doesn't always understand that. They want to make the money and they want to go. They don't understand how to get to where to get to make the money. But for us, it's simplified. It's personality. It really comes down to that. And, you know, some of the best hires we've made, and people laugh at what I'm about to say, is high-end luxury retail. And you look at the likes of Nordstrom's and Neiman Marcus and Bloomingdale's, those type of stores, some of the best hires in my entire career came from there. Why? They understand the customer. I can teach them about food, I can teach them about wine, but I can't teach them to understand the customer.
I loved what you just said about making somebody else's day better. One of the things that I've often thought about, and I've shared with younger people in our industry, is, you know, sometimes somebody will complain about, they'll get a call or something like that, and it's difficult. I'll just say, I want you to think about it like you're in a grocery store, and there's a man or woman in front of you, and they have 2 screaming kids in their cart full of groceries, trying to get cashed out with
Jonathan's real life experience. Sorry.
with bad change being made, all these other things, with your kids having pulled a bunch of stuff off the shelf you don't want to buy, and all these other things. And the person you're talking to is that person right now. Because what you may not know is what else is going on in their world, the other things that they're struggling with. And you have to be able to be sensitive to that. You know, and look, none of us are perfect, right? We all have our challenges, but you have to be able to understand and empathize that the other person who you're working with here, whether it's someone you're reporting to, whether it's a customer, whoever it is another human being with things going on, and you may not know what a lot of those things are, and they probably don't know what your things are. And so I wanted to kind of build off that a little bit, because I think it's a great point. And I want to go back to Brian for a second, because I think, you know, as Brian was talking earlier about, in the beginning it was just on the phone, and now there's a lot of other ways you're engaging with people. And I imagine in a lot of cases you're working with folks who you have no idea what's going on. It's just you kind of met them for the first time, and you quickly have to deduce, like, is their life falling apart and that's why they're calling, or is it, you know? So can you talk a little bit more about that and kind of how you guys approach that?
Sure. Before I do that, if I could just, you know, quick little 30-second hit. What both Mitch and Seth said carries over to my world too. Some of the for most of the folks in my group, they're recent college graduates. It's their first job within the financial industry. So when I look at resumes, I'm not just looking at where they went to school, where they did an internship. I specifically pinpoint the ones who've worked in a restaurant for the exact same reasons. They know how to multitask. They know how to problem solve, level set expectations, quickly turn a negative into a positive outcome. And I always use, whenever we start with client service training, the first thing that we talk about is a restaurant experience. Think about anytime you've been to a restaurant, the food could be great, the atmosphere could be great, but if the service doesn't meet your expectations, that reflects on the entire industry. That carries over to our world, because we're managing people's money, so the expectations are going to be higher. So to bring it back to your question, people, especially now with just everything that's been going on this year, is a lot of volatility in the markets. You have people who are concerned about their savings, whether it's their retirement savings for their for their child's education, whatever the case may be. So we have to take that into account when people are calling up, when they have concerns, or if they've had a loved one or a family member that's passed away. Just being empathetic with whatever the caller's situation is, if they've expressed what it is, or if that comes up in the discussion, just quickly being empathetic, recognizing that these are people you're dealing with. You're not just dealing with a name and an account number. These are people. They have concerns. They have goals for what their finances are going to be. So you want to level set those expectations as best you can as to the level of service that you can provide. One, to address whatever the situation is, but just to give them that confidence, that feeling going forward that they're in the right spot. And if they have a problem, they know that we can take care of it.
I like that a lot, that sentiment of, we're trying to provide confidence so that the person that we're speaking to, and I think that applies not just to kind of downstream, but upstream, right? So if you're in a position where you're speaking with someone who is your client, who is the person who might be, your superior, or you're trying to, to elevate yourself, a lot of it is about making other people feel confident in what you are providing. And I think that's a great term. And I'm going to go back to Seth for a second, because I want to use that off of something else that I didn't give him a chance to talk about, which is kind of this idea of like, everyone else is kind of smarter than they used to be, for lack of a better term, right? There's so much more information. And I know, because, my brother and I have talked about this before, that in the food industry, the Food Network is just like, just changed the whole world at this point, because every person who walks in any restaurant now is a gourmet, and they all know way more about food than the people in the restaurant. So to Seth for a second, in those environments where you are really dealing with folks who feel like their expertise, how do you give them confidence to feel like you are providing a great experience for them when they might feel like they know more about providing that experience than you do?
It starts with the training. The training is the key, but exuding confidence. I use an example often in our business with wine. Wine is something that a lot of, especially younger generation, doesn't know a lot about. Okay. And it's something that we spend a lot of time teaching. But if you can walk up to a table and exude confidence in that Pinot Noir, whether it's right or wrong, 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you they think they know because they saw it on the Food Network, but they don't know. So, and it starts with that personality. And if you're walking up to that table and you simplify it to that, and you're confident in what you're doing, and you're looking at your guests, over time, that buys you that confidence. Specific to our industry, the other thing that we're challenged with is, believe it or not, and there's probably many people on here today that feel this way, people are afraid to fly. And, we're in airports. So a lot of times we're coming in behind the 8 ball already. They sit down at a table and they're petrified. They're about to get on an airplane. Maybe it's their first time flying. So our team has to exude the confidence that it's going to be okay. And it's developing that personal connection as soon as they initially greet that individual. And that's the key, is that initial, consultation. And I'm sure for Mitch and Brian, it's very similar in your worlds, that initial phone call or that initial meeting with a client. That's where it starts. It's very hard to go back to that later on in the relationship. But it's a teaching tool of confidence and finding one thing. We talk about one thing all the time that they can relate to that guest with, and take it from there in that quick 30-second greet they're doing with that guest, that snapshot.
I love that idea of the snapshot, and I'm going to go back to Mitch, because I think there's a great transition here. So Mitch's world, which is one that I know reasonably well, because as I like to tell people, and this is not to offend any other architects on this call, but the first thing they tell you in architecture school is everything and nobody else knows anything. So when vendors and stuff come in, you tell them what to do because you're the architect and you're the smart one, which by the way is not even true. But I know, Mitch is working with designers every day. He's working with people who are really talented, really skilled, who know a lot about furniture. And in a lot of cases, he's constantly, kind of meeting new ones and meeting new folks and trying to build those quick relationships so that we can have a collaborative dialogue about furniture and a collaborative dialogue about making sure the client gets what they need. So Mitch, I'd ask you to talk a little bit about how that happens and about how, even though you're working with people who do know a lot about furniture, you guys are still the furniture experts, and you have to build that confidence and build that trust relationship very quickly.
You're spot on, Jonathan. And what Brian and Seth are talking about too, I think is completely relevant to our world. I mean, it's about confidence. I mean, my best salespeople walk into a room, they assume that they're going to win the deal. And they're confident in their interaction, and confidence breeds confidence in your clients. I mean, if you feel you're giving a presentation and you feel like you know what you're talking about and you've got the experience and you've done this before, an architect or a construction company or whoever the person is that we're working with needs to know that we've done this before and we've done it successfully. So you need to be able to communicate that. And it comes back again to our initial premise, which was you've got to be able to ask a lot of questions. What is the win for the client? At the end of the project, if the client, I always tell this to people, at the end of a project, if a client were to look back and say, this project was extremely successful, what characteristics did that project have? What did we do to make it that successful? And what are the client's wins? The client themselves under a lot of pressure from their end users, as the architect may be, the general contractor may be. So you have to ask questions to find out what those parameters are. And, that comes with time. Unfortunately, a young kid that just jumps out of school and if he gets thrust to an architect from Sims Maney or Gensler or CBT or Elkis, and they start asking very difficult questions, they've got to have the ability to ask questions and then be able to fend them off and say, I want to get back to you with that. I don't know, but let me get back to you with that. And then it comes back to the speed question. It's one thing to say, I'm going to get back and call that person 2 days later. That ain't going to fly. So you need to find the information and get it right back to the customer or the specifier. Because speed, again, is that's what's completely been changed in our business, is this ability for us to do things quickly.
I know a lot of that's relationship based, but do you have formal ways that you evaluate that you've met those goals?
Well, at a post-project level, we do. So we'll send out audits to our clients when a project is complete. That asks, a handful of questions. How do we do? Were we responsive? 5 or 6 different things. Were the installers good? Were the salesperson knowledgeable? And you collect that on a basis, an annualized basis, and you can start to derive some trends from that.
Is that something that you use kind of internally as a training follow-up with people? So does it give you an opportunity to sit back down with the folks you're working with and say, hey, we did a really good job here. We did a really good job here, but this particular customer is telling us, maybe they're not getting this. And so how do we look at what we do differently because of that kind of feedback?
Absolutely. And we take it a step further in that if the client's not happy with something that we did, it's escalated. We talk to the salesperson, but we escalate it up the management row at our place, and then management's required to respond to it with the customer. Because you just don't, that's the kiss of death in any business, is losing your existing base of customers. And you really have to look at your existing clients and the ones who've gotten you to where you are, and make sure you don't forget them. Don't forget them when times get good. Don't forget them when times get bad, because they didn't forget you, but they will if you stop returning their calls or stop reaching out to them.
I think that's, kind of even more topical now, right? Because we're all living in a very separated environment. And I think that, that's a big. I was reading something recently about something that was written 6 or 7 years ago, actually, about a company that operates mostly virtual, and they were kind of making this point that, you know, amongst their team members, they have a chat, as most of us know, you know, now, and a chat functionality, and one manager was talking about how, you know, he comes online every morning and he looks to see every one of his people who are online, and he makes it a point to just say good morning to all of them and say, how are you doing? And I think that, you know, that kind of a personal check-in of reminding is so important in today's world, you know, that we are staying connected with people on a regular basis for reasons other than just because I have a question to ask or I need something or whatever. And do you find, you know, Mitch, in your world, that kind of those connections that may not necessarily be I have a project or I need to sell you something or whatever, are the kinds of things that people really remember?
Yeah, yeah. You know, and I'll even take it down to a more basic level. You know, technology has taken us to a point now where you call the company, you bypass the switchboard, the front desk. I mean, we for years and years and years had a woman named Carol Rhodes who was our receptionist, who knew every client that we had, and they loved her. She was crazy as a loon, but we loved her. And our clients would call in just to talk to Carol. And she would go to the ends of the world. If so-and-so client was calling, she knew that that client needed to be responded to, then she would search us out and find us and make sure that hold us accountable to get back to the client. And that's a simple thing that hopefully, as time moves on and technology increases, we don't lose sight of that sort of personal human touch when a client's trying to reach out to you, because they typically got something on their mind that's urgent when they're calling you.
So I think that's interesting, and I want to go to Brian for a second, because Brian, one of the things that I don't know this for a fact, but I would expect is that in your world, there's probably metrics in place relative to how many calls you guys take, how many, you know, all those kinds of things, I'm sure, right? Your BlackRock is still running a business, right? We need to, there's, you know, and I know I call my own financial people, and, you know, there's, you know, you can't just sit there for 2 hours and have a conversation if there's not something specific to talk about. So how do you guys balance what I would call the personal side of those conversations with the fact that you know you have an agenda, you know you need to get X number of things done in a time period? How do you work with people to kind of balance that?
What we do is, you know, we do have, you know, the daily metrics as far as number of calls, average talk time, as we call it, post-call work, anything like that, if there's any type of fulfillment or problem resolution that needs to take place. So we are mindful of that, because we do have service levels that are mandated by our fund board for what percentage of calls we're answering within the first 20 seconds. And that service level is actually the highest in the industry. It's 93%. Meaning 93% of our calls are answered within the first 20 seconds. So that minimizes the amount of time someone has to wait in queue. So we've all been in this instance where you call an 800 number, you know, they say, please hold for the next available representative, and then it seems like forever. We're sensitive to that, where within the first 20 seconds, we're going to respond as best we can, where somebody's going to come right on the line, introduce themselves, get your information, things like that. So it's just really trying to provide that white glove treatment. We're trying to minimize that wait. Then even still, as far as managing expectations, if we have to, you know, say place a caller on hold while we're looking up something on their counter, things like that, we'll tell them right up front, rather than just saying, oh, please hold, and drop them into a hold queue. We would phrase it instead as far as, do you mind if I just place you on hold, a brief 2 to 3 minute hold while I look into this for you? So we're asking for their permission first, because nobody likes to be put on hold. And then while that service rep is working on the problem, they can see that there's a counter, how long this hold actually is. So we train them as they start getting towards the back end. If it's about 2 minutes, 40 seconds, 2:45, and you're still working on it, you check back in with the caller, you know, hi, Mr. Hanley, thank you very much for holding. I appreciate your patience. Sorry about the delay. It is taking a little bit longer than I thought to look into this for you. If you'd like, if I could just have a good callback number for you, and then I can call you back when the problem is resolved. So just really taking the ownership of it, acknowledging that person's time, and then of course, following up when you say you're going to follow up. Just really taking that ownership, and again, tying it back to being proactive and just trying to best manage clients' expectations as best we can, but also too, especially if it's a busier than usual day, then we don't want to rush anybody off the phones. You know, it's, if you call us up and you have a problem, we're there for you is for whatever much time you need. But that also, if something is taking longer to address, that gives us the opportunity on our end to spend more time looking into it, managing our actual talk times better, but also being sensitive to the client's time and not making them sit and wait on hold.
I think that's wonderful, and I want to build off that a little bit, and I'm going to come back to Seth in a second here, because I think the idea of time is so important in these conversations, right? I think that, you know, one of the things that I often impart upon people as they're growing in their careers is this idea of, you know, you have to feel that your own time is valuable, because that's very important, and then you have to respect time of every person that you're speaking with. And so both your time is valuable and their time is valuable, and you want to make sure that you're using that time as well as you can. But I want to add to that for something Seth said earlier when he was talking about the fact that, you know, in the airport, obviously time is really everything, because, you know, you've got people who are trying to catch flights that oftentimes are moving around timing wise, that, you know, it may come now, it may come later. There's all kinds of variables that are way out of your control. And on top of that, you have people that are encountering it in a very stressful situation in many cases, because they might be stressed out to fly, they might be stressed out because they're late, they might be stressed out because they're trying to chase their kids around the airport. Again, I might know that one personally. And so, you know, there's all kinds of added anxiety to the folks that are engaging in your service. So I wondered, Seth, if you could talk a little bit about some of the benchmarks, perhaps, or at least rules of thumb that you guys think about in terms of timing for when people actually come into the restaurants.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on Brian for a second before I go there, you know, our world, we don't always have the opportunity to make it right. You know, when there is a customer service challenge, so we have to rely on internal matrices that we have to make sure that 99.5% of the time we're doing what's right. Because when we might find out about a problem or a guest that's not happy, they could have flown from Boston Logan, they're already in Los Angeles, and they're not coming back.
Sit on a plane for 6 hours and think about how bad the service was.
Yeah, and absolutely. So that's part of it. So, you know, I think when you talk about timing overall for us and people short on time and stressful, you know, we look at industry benchmarks. You know, people want to be within 50 feet of their airport gate, where they're flying from. They're going to probably show up to the airport. If you're a leisure traveler, 90 minutes before. You're going to board 30 minutes before. You know, our biggest key is we ask every single person that walks in, the first question after, hi, how are you, welcome, you know, how's your day going, is how much time do you have? So that we can set the clear expectation up front. So if somebody walks in and says they board in 20 minutes and they want to order a well-done burger, we're going to set that expectation out. That's not going to happen, because you're a 3-minute walk to your gate. That's 17 minutes to your board. You know, well-done burgers, you know, 13, 14 minutes. If it hits the grill right now, you're going to be frantic. You're already stressed. So it's setting that expectation up front so we know. So then we use that confidence factor that we've talked a lot about this afternoon to guide them in a direction that will make them confident, and use that then as a benchmark for timing to know how much time people would probably have to handle this.
I would expect that involves a lot of communication in your team.
Yeah, it does. You know, it does. Communication in our business is key to kind of everything we do, is communicating and properly communicating, and, you know, making sure that in that situation where the person has 20 minutes, that server is telling the kitchen, hey, I just rung XYZ in. They got to be out of here in 20 minutes, you know, and working through that, because that's where we lose that confidence factor. We lose that there. is if we can't do that, or if we tell somebody we can, just to try to please them, even though we know in our head it can't be done.
So that's an interesting, excuse me, that's an interesting point you just brought up, which is, this idea of kind of over-promising for something as opposed to, being transparent to someone about, what you actually can deliver and creating a reasonable expectation. So when you are talking with folks, or when you're kind of looking for people who are servers, or people who are going to engage people around, or even people who aren't, people who are back of house, kitchen staff, people like that, who are communicating back, how do you kind of figure out people who might be strong in those areas? Is there something that you look for to identify, who those folks necessarily might be when you're looking to staff up your teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things, and one of them people, will look at and say, is how they come prepared for the interview. Do they have a pen to fill out the application? Are they dressed properly? You see those two things, and a lot of times what a couple of those things in our history so will show you is they could be organized. They thought ahead about this interview. So that means they're going to think ahead as they work through this. And those are two just, simple things that we look at. And then we, throughout that process, we give a lot of scenario-based questions, because that can show how you can multitask, and more importantly than multitask, it can give the inclination or the ability to show that they can think on the fly, which our business is all about that. What happens now is different than 10 minutes from now, different from an hour from now, different from a day from now. And understanding how they answer those and how they look at that, and looking at them, and when they're speaking to you, are they kind of bullet pointing their way through it, or are they just kind of giving you a narrative? So think how they process the information.
I think that's pretty interesting. So when you are kind of engaging these people, and specifically, I'm asking you this because I know that, you have managers under you who are then hiring those people. So I'm interested in how you talk to your managers about this, right? So how are you empowering your managers to help understand these things? Are there things that you're teaching the managers to then teach other people?
Yeah, and I think part of that comes with mentoring the managers, and spending time with them and getting them to see the perspective of what let's call it, the culture is, and what you're looking to drive home. And it's, for me, and this is a personal thing, I want my team to learn from their mistakes. And we go into this, them understanding they're going to make mistakes. But if we learn from them, and then we use every mistake they make as a teaching moment, we had a situation recently. We were opening a brand new airport. The local team hired somebody after I had said, don't hire this person, that's going to be a problem. They lasted about 6 days. And we sat down, the manager and I, and we walked through where it went wrong. And we walked through the things we talk about, the personality. We talk about the scenario-based questions, and how when they didn't hit those, we should have seen that as enough of an area to move on from it. But it's understanding these managers understand that, there is no golden rule of hiring. And anybody can tell you there really isn't. We know this. But there's an instinct, and coaching your team. And part of that, more importantly than teaching the managers, is hiring managers that share that philosophy. And then developing them and building on it from there with them. Because that's half the battle, is philosophically, you got to share with your team, and, at our height, obviously, right now, but, I have nothing without the 400 employees we have. My managers have nothing without the 400. I mean, it's the front line. So we got to make sure we're on the same page.
How do you kind of help them feel that in all of this?
So that's an interesting question, especially right now. We're in the Zoom, Microsoft Teams world now. Okay. And prior to March 15th, And obviously, as my brother, you know this, I spend a lot of time in our airports because I believe in our business, the hands-on approach is really the important way. It's a lot harder to convey this stuff through a Zoom or through a Teams. It's walking the site with them. It's spending the hours, and it's at the end of the day sitting down with them and saying, guys, here's where we are, and here's where we want to get to, or here's where we already are, and now let's fine tune this. But it's open communication, and I think what's important is guiding them through the process. You know, I start each of my days with a call with them. You know, a quick, it could be 10 seconds, it could be 20 minutes, each of them individually, that, you know, my leadership that leads for me, so they understand where we are, and I want to know what they have going on. And, you know, it's the same process that you find at the team member level, the servers. It's developing the connection, and it might be different with everybody. And it's having different ways of understanding hospitality. So they feel that, you know, the way I might mentor a manager in Boston is different than I might mentor a manager at JFK in New York. And using different tools. In Boston, I might need to talk to the person once a week. JFK, I might need to every day set 3, 4, 5 items that we're mentoring through to develop them. And you have to be able to play off of that and understand the differences, because that's where we lose it, when we have one style for everybody. And with customer service component of that, there's an overall basis, right, of what we want, but there's different ways to get to the end goal.
Brian, I have to believe that resonates with you quite a bit, because I'm sure that in addition to even your own team, obviously you're dealing with people all over the place, and you're not in person with any of them. So can you talk a little bit about, you know, some perhaps tactics or approaches you guys take to kind of try to, not to slightly paraphrase Seth for a second, but to set a baseline at least, and then to understand that we're still going to go above that, but we may go above it in different directions depending on the situation?
Yeah, sure. With our group, where we've never had face-to-face interaction to begin with, so we're, you know, a little bit different that way, where we've always been, you know, a toll-free contact center. So it's not like, you know, let's say if we're a retail branch office where somebody could come in and sit and ask questions. So that part hasn't changed, but setting those expectations remotely now, especially where people will ask, where are you? We would tell people, we're based out of Boston, but we have people working from home like everybody else from all over the place, but still providing that same service level. But the point that that Seth made earlier, as far as mentoring people differently, same thing. Someone who has been in our group for a while, obviously, who is, you know, has certain securities licenses, is able to speak to different client bases, they may not need as much mentoring as someone who's only been in the role maybe 6 months, and there's still some things that they're getting comfortable with, still some product lines that they need to learn. We may have to take more of a hands-on approach with them. What we also do too is, for mentoring for all of our employees, since we are telephone based, is just in listening to samples each week, 3 calls each week from actual interactions that they've had with clients and with an advisor, and then just breaking it down, almost like, you know, like any type of sports coach would break down videotape, you know, just kind of breaking the call up into snippets, and not just, oh, you did this right, this you might want to say different. It's like, you know, let's talk about this. You tell me what you heard, and then, you know, explain, you know, why you explained it that way to the caller. You know, just that way it gets them, rather than us just telling them, it's like, it's to get them thinking more and taking ownership about what the client's expectations are, and how they should be providing service accordingly. So that mentoring aspect really becomes hands-on in that way, because then that allows our service reps to then do that type of mentoring with clients, if you would. A lot of times when clients call us, that they may only call us if they have a problem. We have some people who are repeat callers who call quite a bit, but we have some people that they maybe only call maybe once a year or so. So it's almost like we have to reintroduce ourselves to them each time and reset that expectation and reaffirm that expectation too. Just if someone says, the feedback that we get from clients in some cases, like, I don't call that often, but every time I do that, just the experience has been great. I just come away feeling more comfortable, feeling more confident. I feel like I've learned something. People are very helpful. We get that from shareholders and from financial advisors. It just helps draw more business there. If you set that expectation as being a high level, almost white glove, if you would, service provider, that's going to be expectation each time when somebody calls us or reaches out to us online. So we're just constantly coaching and mentoring our employees just to stay at that level. These are the expectations that your clients have of us based on the feedback we've received from them. So we really have to strive to be at that level always.
I love the sentiment of kind of, I'm going to call it scenario planning, which you've talked about. And then Seth talked about kind of role-based questions. I want to ask Mitch, because I know that on the sales side of things, Mitch mentioned, kind of post-project evaluations and things like that, and kind of looking at different situations. But I wanted to ask, do you do specific sales training scenarios where you work with people to actually, I guess, mock sales, and do you do any of that with folks who are learning kind of the sales side of this?
Absolutely. We do it frequently and have for years and years and years. I mean, that's really the basis of sales training, is to do it, based on scenario planning. We'll do it on a micro level, from just one-on-one with the manager and the salesperson, to peer sessions where groups will get together and present to each other. Because a big chunk of what we try to do is to get our customer into the showroom for a presentation so that we can take them through, and that's really our marketing tool. So, we've got different levels of people who have got different skill sets that we can draw from to train the younger people and even the senior people. It's amazing how many of the senior guys really are not good at putting on a presentation, and they're much better at that sort of interpersonal relationships. And this whole Zoom thing, like you guys talked about, it's really shaken up our business, because we're such a tactile business. We reach out, we have samples and finishes and products and chairs you got to sit in and desks that you got to sit in and lights you got to turn on, and you can't really do that from looking at Zoom squares all day long. So it's been interesting to see what some of our more creative people have done to still reach out and touch their customer. My daughter is in the business, and she's very active at having things in her backyard these days where they're socially distanced, and she'll have wine and cheeses and stuff in her backyard with her new puppy. And it's amazing the power of sales with a new puppy. But you've got to be creative today, because it really has thrown our whole business for a loop. And it's the people who can be creative and thoughtful and ingenious, I'm looking for the right word, are going to succeed.
Do you think that it's really been an opportunity for people to rethink how they communicate, both, kind of good and bad? And are you kind of seeing that firsthand, that people are the way that people communicate, whether it's methods, frequency, kind of, I would say even formality, is really shifting because of a lot of this?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's good or bad. I mean, it's what it is. It's interesting to see the older people in the workforce who aren't technologically savvy learn to become more technologically savvy because they have to. So for years we pushed it off and just said, well, I don't really need to do that. I can still do it the old way. Well, you can't do it the old way anymore. You're going to have to step up and learn. So again, it's a way for people to learn new skills in their business. But man, it comes down to a personal touch. You still got to figure out how I develop my relationship with Jonathan, and why would you want to work with me? So if it means that I become an expert in Zoom and that type of thing, then that's what I have to do. But you got to figure out ways to still stay in touch with your customer. And again, if you're in a business like mine, you've got to figure out a way to touch your customer and to be in front of them in some form or fashion.
I like the sentiment of what you just said, in the sense of, why do you want to work with me? And I think that's a really important concept that is, not limited to someone who's trying to hire you, but really to anyone who is, a stakeholder in what you're doing. So again, going back to where we started of, we can have internal customers, we can have external customers, we have customers all around us, both above and below and left and right. And I think, this idea of like, all the people that you interact with in the course of a day, trying to think about it as, why would they want to work with me, and how do I make it obvious to them or make them feel like they want to work with me? And I think that's kind of an important idea that I think you're talking about here. And I wondered if you could, and it's a little bit on the spot, but if there's anything specific you can think of that you think helps to create that feeling that you might be able to share.
Well, I think the biggest thing that you can impart is trust. If you can get your customer to trust you, then you'll find that they're going to open up a lot more opportunities for you. And without that trust, then you're lost. So, and trust is only earned through working with a client over a period of time. It's also setting expectations so that and you explain to them what the expectations are, or they explain to you what their expectations are. You reiterate those, and then make sure that you meet those expectations. And if you're able to do that, you can create trust, and you can create a sort of ongoing back and forth that's a synergistic relationship between the two parties.
So that can apply really, I think, to any relationship. I mean, I think each of you have kind of touched on this a little bit, is this idea of, what we have to do is very quickly, right? Because in Brian's world, it's 20 seconds, and in Mitch's world, maybe it's years, and in Seth's world, it's probably minutes, right? So depending on the world we're talking about, we have to very quickly create expectations. We have to listen to what the goals of our customer are. We have to put those together to basically inform our customer what's going to happen, and then we have to deliver, right? So there's kind of like three parts to this: is, understand what the goals are, then set expectations of what we can provide, and then we can deliver. And I think what's really interesting is, for all three of you, despite very different industries, that's kind of exactly what happens. And I think we could take that and we could apply it to any relationship, right? Whether you're going into your boss to ask for a raise, whether you're in transition trying to find another job, whether you're in a position where you're trying to grow your career, or you're in a position as you're trying to gain more business in your career. I think, the process is the same, right? You're interacting with other people, you're trying to understand what their goals are, you're trying to then set expectations of how you can help, and then you need to deliver on it. And so that's kind of a universal theme that I think is coming out today, that it's very interesting. We have about a couple more minutes. I just glanced over to my screen. Karen's been doing a great job of helping me edit questions as they've been coming in and filter those. So I do see we have about 6 or 7 questions here. So I want to make sure we save some time for those. So I'm just going to ask one last question of our panel, and then we'll go to the questions, which is, what do you do when it doesn't work? So when you've done everything you think you're supposed to do, you think you've done it right, and you still have somebody who's unhappy, what happens then? And I'm going to start with Seth on that one.
It's going to happen. I think this is the simplest answer. It's going to happen. And what we tell our teams, and I've lived by this for a long time, is, if you in your hearts of hearts feel you did everything you could do, there's nothing more to do. And I know that sounds so, but there is just certain times that you come across situations where you could throw the bank at somebody and you're not going to make them happy. And 9 times out of 10, it's nothing you guys did. And that's why I tell my team, it's they walked in that way. Or, you know, when they were looking at stuff with Mitch or they were on call with one of Brian's, they've walked into the situation already not happy. And all that you might have done is exasperated it a little bit. So it's going to happen. And as long as in the flip side of that is when I get a call about an issue that a guest had somewhere, 9 times out of 10, it would have been solved if our management showed they cared and they showed that empathy. So as long as, and I've always said this, that's happening, you know, and you go along that way, there's just unfortunately times where people aren't going to be happy. And unfortunately, in the world of COVID now, you see it more and more. And we've seen an uptick in it. And we believe a part of that uptick is people just unfortunately aren't happy. You know, and it's a challenge. But sometimes there's nothing more you can do. And I know that sounds simple, but it comes down to that.
Totally. Brian, want to get your thoughts on the same topic?
Sure. With our industry, we're very heavily regulated, you know, both by the SEC, by the IRS, you know, by FINRA. You know, there's certain rules that we have to follow that we cannot make our own interpretations of. And a lot of times clients may not be aware of that. So if it's something they're unhappy of, we wouldn't just say, oh, that's an IRS rule. We would explain the why behind it. We would try to explain as much as we can possibly do within the context of the rule, but then also explain the difference of what we cannot do, just to try to level set those expectations. And you're right, there are going to be people who are going to say, you know, I don't care, I need this done. But unfortunately, it's just explaining not, you know, what we're able to do, what we're not able to do, but most importantly, why we're not able to do it. And when things do go wrong, if it is something that when we look back, yeah, we could have done that differently. Yeah, we could have explained that better. We'll revisit, you know, our own, you know, procedures, our own talking points for things that maybe there is a better way to explain something. We're still bound by that rule, but maybe there is a better way that we can explain it to make it more clear to callers, you know, just as far as helping them understand certain, you know, financial regulations, tax regulations, things like that. Just trying to take a broad concept and help simplify it to explain it better so they can better understand it. But, you know, just trying to level set those expectations as much as we can in explaining what we can't do. But if there's explaining not only that we can't do it, but why we can't do it, just to help, you know, customers have a better understanding of the process.
Sure. Mitch, wanted to give you a chance to weigh in on this one too.
Well, I think both the guys hit right on the same thing that are applicable for our business as well. And it comes down to communication. Whether you've got good news or bad news, it needs to be consistent communication. So you need to continually reach out to your customer, talk to them. You're going to screw stuff up. We screw stuff up. I mean, it's just part and parcel of what happens. You've got to be able to have realistic resolutions for them. Sometimes they're just going to just be angry to be angry. And again, probably because somebody's yelling at them on the other end. So you have to be empathetic with them. You have to understand sort of what they need to be able to do their job and to make it right. And then go back and be honest with them about what you can, like Brian said, what you actually can and can't do. Because I'm not going to make, you know, a damaged desk reappear in 2 days. You know, it's made for that person. So, you know, make sure you have resolution. If you do have to deliver bad news, make sure you've got solutions for them as well. Propose potential solutions that might get them through a situation, and have your ducks in a row before you talk to them. But man, you got to talk. You can't let the stuff simmer. You know, we had a rule that was, you know, bad stuff. We responded to our customers within 24 hours after something's come up, even if it's, I don't have an answer for you yet, but I'm still working on it. Like Brian said, with his people. You know, I'm still working on it, and I definitely will get back to you by 2:00 tomorrow. But the idea of consistent communication really is critical in our business.
Yeah, I think consistent communication has been another great theme today that I would latch on to. So we have a few minutes left. There are 5 questions up on my little queue here, so I think we'll go through these real quick. I think we've kind of touched on parts of them, but I want to make sure these get answered for people. So the first one is, there's a fine line between calling to remind people you exist and feeling like you're being pestered. Can you discuss what you feel is the ideal amount of touch points for each of your industries? And we'll come back to Mitch on that to start.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if there's a number, and I think it's probably come down to understanding your clients. But even when times are good, a lot of our specifiers and our clients don't want to be pestered. You know, the kiss of death in my business is coming in saying, hey, to an architect or a designer, hey, what are you working on? You might as well just walk yourself back out to your car and head home, because they don't want to hear it. So if you do touch base with them, you have to be relevant. You have to show up with something that says that you can help them through with a situation based on the information that you're presenting. Present something new, present something relevant, present something you think would help them do their job. Don't just touch base to say, hey, how you doing? Because they got a busy workload, and it's busier now than ever, the folks that are still working. So know your customer.
I agree with that one. Seth?
I mean, I think what Mitch, know your customer. In our world, if you have a table of 2 businessmen that are in a real conversation, you're less is more. You're going over, you're getting the order, you're getting out. Whereas if you have 4 ladies out for a leisurely lunch that might want to interact more, but it comes back to you really read your customer, because you risk the ability of annoying them, you know, and frustrating the situation, which could escalate.
Brian?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Knowing your customer is critical. We're dealing both with shareholders as well as financial advisors. You know, the financial advisor we're probably going to be just more right to the point with, because that's how they're going to be with us. They just want to get their information, get off the phone, because we're not the only call they have to make. So we're going to be more direct and to the point with them. Whereas if you have an older shareholder who's calling about their retirement account, you're going to be more conversational with them. You're going to be more patient with them. Another thing that we coach our people on too is, since we don't use scripts, we do have certain talking points for certain inquiry types, but it still allows you to be yourself in a professional setting. I'm sure, you know, there's folks on the line who've had the experience before of calling an 800 number for somewhere, and you can tell right off the bat the person is reading a script word for word, and it just doesn't sound real. You know, it's you know that you can't do one size fits all or one approach fits all. You really have to know and understand who the person is that you're speaking with, and then tailor your approach accordingly.
Great. All right, we're going to move to the next one, and actually this is a question really just for Brian. When discussing exuding confidence, Seth and Mitch have the advantage of being in person. Does Brian have any additional insight on how to provide confidence when being remote or virtual?
Yes, with us, and this falls back to the amount of time that we spend training our people. We spend, before our folks even talk to their first shareholder, take their first actual phone call, they've spent about 5 to 6 weeks in training, just because, one, there's so much to learn, but also you had mentioned, you know, scenario planning or mock sales. We do a lot of mock calling for just to run them through as many possible situations as they can and get instant feedback and recreate the environment on the phones as much as they can. So that way they are confident, they are knowledgeable. There's not as much of a learning curve when they first get on the phone if they're just instead trained in a short time period. Do this, do this, do this. All right, here's a desk and a headset, get to it. We just spend so much emphasis not only on their initial training, but on their ongoing training, where they're getting that weekly feedback, that weekly one-on-one time, that weekly up coaching, just to help exude that confidence, where all the caller really has to go by is what they're hearing over the phone, hearing our tone of voice, things like that, hearing what we're saying, how we're explaining things. So just constant training to build that confidence.
Great. Next question, we still have about 10 minutes, so we'll see if we can get through these. How do you feel technology and COVID has changed each of your industries during this time, and how you keep your customers engaged? And I'm going to start with Mitch with that one.
It's made our business very difficult. I mean, we're tied in closely with the commercial real estate markets. When you've got a pandemic like this, where the result of is that everybody leaves their office and goes to work from home, that's not good for your office furniture salesman. It's knocking on doors. So you've got to very quickly reinvent yourself to be able to become someone who's a service provider that people need. And so what does that mean? It means that, it's the types of products that you're selling, it's the type of services that you're offering. All of a sudden things change from, low benching type stations with, 36-inch, 42-inch high product to now people are looking at taller workstations, panels, more traditional types, things that can develop, blocking areas. Collaborative areas don't become, so the whole interior design portion of what we're doing based on, it's thrown up into the air. And people are just worried to not know, is this the new normal? Or come after a vaccine and later next year, the things come back to the way that they're somewhat similar to what they were before. But man, it's definitely put a monkey wrench into our industry.
I think both Brian and Seth have touched on this a little bit, but if you want to briefly touch on it as well.
Sure. We're seeing more and more folks who are taking advantage of self-service portals. We've made it easier to access that on our website. We're directing people more to it. Not that we don't want them to call us, we don't want them to talk to us, but just having that flexibility of working remotely, being able to, for people if they're working remotely, not able to, always, call in or check on, things like that, making it easier for them to check online. Through their phone app, things like that. And then if they need a further assistance, that's where we would come in.
So,
well, nobody's flying. So that's problem number one. And, in our business, which is a touch point business, people don't want to see a server. They don't want them anywhere near them. So kind of maneuvering that world, and it's really thrown, just quickly, QR codes that have been around for years, but nobody utilized. QR codes are, everybody all of a sudden thinks the coolest technology out there, and having to adapt to integrate customer service into a QR code. And it's really, it's thrown a wrench in the business for what business there is.
Okay, we have two more questions. Let's see if we can get through both. I like this next one. Mentoring has been discussed quite a bit. How do you find the virtual work environment is inhibiting this? Junior staff is often mentored and taught simply by observing senior staff and interactions in the office and witnessing spontaneous situations. Do you have tips for overcoming this? I'm going to start with Seth on this one.
Yeah, it's tough. It's definitely tough. I would say constant communication through this virtual world, digging into certain things, using this time to mentor on areas that are more, advantageous to this world. So like in our world, mentoring on financials, you can do financials virtually. You can do things along those lines and picking things that work better in this environment with the hope that down the road, whatever this new normal is, we get back to it.
Mitch?
Well, this is where leadership really comes into play. As a leader in your organization, you really need to, whereas interaction and mentoring happened, on an impromptu basis as much as it would on a formal basis, it's just got to be formalized. So from a leadership standpoint, you have to make sure that your younger people are paired up with some senior people and have specific programs set up or certain times for them to interact with each other. But it's just not something that can just happen through happenstance anymore. It's something you've got to plan for. And again, I think the good leaders will do so and make sure that happens.
Brian?
Yeah, we're doing the same where normally if we had someone new, they would be, part of their training would be observing side by side with a more tenured service rep. We're in the process right now of onboarding 5 new people remotely. They're finishing their second week of training, but what they're doing is all their training is being done remote in this type of setting, but even that one-on-one interaction with the tenured rep is happening remotely, and they have the ability to remotely listen to that rep speaking with the client, while at the same time that rep is explaining to them via internal chat, this is why I'm explaining this the way I am. Think back to when you learned this in your training, things like that. So it is a challenge, but we're utilizing tools like everyone else, like video meetings like this, using group chats, things like that, just to try to help that team feel as connected as much as possible.
Great. All right, last question. We got a couple minutes, and then we'll wrap up here. Can you discuss how after your customer is happy with you and then either the project ends or they leave, how do you stay connected and engage post-project meal discussion in order to keep them coming back? So Seth, we'll start with you on that one.
I think it's understanding the level of service in our world. We've done some case studies that you can develop regulars in the airport. So it's connecting. It's that personal relationship, and it might be the bartender knowing that John Smith travels Mondays and Thursdays. He's going to be at your bar at 4 o'clock, and continuing that conversation through technology and through social media and stuff to continue to build that bond. And knowing in our world, we believe if we give a good experience, they will be back.
Brian?
I would agree. If we have someone who calls in, if they've realized that the level of service that they're getting from us is different from somewhere else where they may also hold investments, that may be the deciding factor to then onboard their portfolio elsewhere with us instead. So just constantly providing that so that you have, not only repeat clients, but also it helps bring new business in. If someone feels that they've been, because most investment companies offer similar products, but if someone says, hey, I work with, I have my accounts at BlackRock, the service has been fantastic, that person may say, oh, well, I usually have a hard time getting a hold of someone at my financial company. That might be a deciding factor to help them move over.
Absolutely. Mitch, we'll finish up.
I think probably the biggest thing I learned in this business was when you're busy, things are great. You got customers everywhere, people calling you, but eventually it's going to get slow again. These things happen in cycles. Don't ever forget the customers that got you where you are. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of people that just get busy and then they don't return the call of that small customer that bought, a small amount of furniture from them 6 years ago, who now, when you didn't return the call, all of a sudden they're twice the size. So it's imperative that you remember who got you to where you are and stay in touch with those people.
I think that's a great overall concept for everybody to remember. Remember who got you where you are and stay connected. Well, we're just about out of time. I want to turn it back to Catherine to close up, but I want to say thank you to our panelists. In true transparency, I was going to wish my father a happy birthday tomorrow, but I think he's dropped off, so he misses out on that. So a lost opportunity there. Speaking of calling an audible, but thank you to the panelists, and thank you to Catherine, and I'll turn it over to you to finish us up.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank the panelists as well, Brian and Mitch and Seth, and thank you, Jonathan, for moderating. Really nice job, and also take the opportunity to thank committee members Karen and Jim for their work on this program. So really great information. I took a lot of notes. I know it's out on LinkedIn already. A number of common themes across the group, but some very unique perspectives too. So very, very educational. Wanted to remind everybody to please keep an eye out for the survey, which you will receive shortly. Your feedback is really important to us, so please be sure to send us your thoughts. And thanks everyone for joining, and have a great weekend.